Coming up, one SEC coach has said something. I'm not so sure Auburn and LSU fans are going to like it, but we'll tell you all about it next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We are glad you're with us. We're having a fun time today. Talk a little SEC, stir up some trouble, just kind of see what happens here.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the YouTube page loaded because it's been such a hit the last few days, so I'm like trying to focus in on getting everything right, but it is a fun show today.
I mean, listen, I think the one thing that we ought to get credit for here is we do on this show try to be as user-friendly, as interactive as possible. You know, I don't think there's any show on Facebook Live that takes more comments on a daily basis than we do, both on, you know, on the Facebook Live side of things and the YouTube side of things. Honestly, that is our reason for existing, to be as interactive as you can be.
No, I can't agree with you more. And when people ask me about the show and I tell them about the show, I'm like, this is not like, we're not preaching to anybody. This is more of like a, hey, we want to know what you think just to see if what we think matches.
I mean, honestly, one of my favorite things about talking to the commenters every day is God knows I don't want to just talk to you for an hour.
That's definitely true. Tyler Mann says, what's up, fellas? So we got this thing cranked off.
All right, so let's dive in here. Item number one. We always start the show the same way. It's our big news around the SEC. We call it our first and 10. And item number one on the list, I don't think this coach meant for this to be a controversial deal, but it sort of ends up sort of landing that way in terms of, I think some SEC West fan bases just don't like this very much. Will Muschamp, the South Carolina coach, speaking to Jason Kersey of The Athletic, and Muschamp in the balance between the SEC East and the SEC West, well, he doesn't really quite see that division in the West the same way maybe some other folks might. Here's what Will Muschamp had to say about that to Jason Kersey. He says, I think it all goes in cycles. There was a time when Florida and Tennessee were really battling every year for the SEC championship and the national championship. It swung to the West side now. But I think more than anything, it's not the West, it's Alabama. Alabama has been dominant. That's what I would look at and point to. Is Will Muschamp correct for saying that the SEC West and the perceived sort of strength in comparison to the East is really mostly just Alabama?
I have to disagree with him, and I understand where that comes from. I mean, Alabama has for the better part of the last 10 years, obviously mowed down a lot of teams. I think last time Alabama lost to an SEC East team, if I'm not mistaken, was South Carolina in 2010. So South Carolina is right there in terms of what they've been doing, but I think when you look at the overall balance, and this is something you and I don't get into much on the show, talking about the balance between the leagues, and we haven't talked about it in a while. I mean, we used to get into it all the time. But I do look at it and say, listen, Florida's not what they historically are. Tennessee's on their way back. Both of those teams do have new head coaches. And so I understand the ability to look over at Alabama and say, man, they really dominated the West. But the West really has, in terms of head-to-head matchups, done a lot of good things, specifically last year in the way those two divisions match up.
Well, when I started the show, I said this is the kind of thing that I don't think Auburn fans are going to like. I don't think LSU fans are going to like this. And really, if you want to go back and kind of look in that period of time you mentioned since South Carolina beat Alabama in 2010, LSU played for a national championship in 2011. LSU won an SEC championship. Auburn played for a national championship in 2013. They won the national championship in 2010. I mean, listen, I sort of get what Muschamp is saying. Now, when I look at these two divisions right now, do I see the West as way better than the East? Honestly, I don't know that I do. But if you want to look at the sort of recent last decade history, I mean, there's no doubt that there's some teams in the SEC West that have done a lot more than what the East has been able to do. I mean, until Georgia this year, the last SEC East team that was even capable of winning the league had Tim Tebow playing for it. So, I mean, from that standpoint, I mean, there has been a pretty big imbalance.
Yeah, and I think that, listen, I think it continued last year, and obviously when you look at some of the head-to-head matchups, like I mentioned, I mean, some of those matchups last year, I mean, think of what LSU's schedule was last year with the East. That would have been something that in years past, those would have been two huge matchups. LSU going up to Knoxville and LSU playing Florida in the Swamp. And I think they just didn't have the same luster because some of those teams just aren't playing to what they are historically. And I think that's why they're obviously dealing with new coaches this year.
Zachary Minton in the comment section says Auburn showed last year that we are for real, #War Eagle. And with that in mind, let me let you hear a little bit of Gus Malzahn on this subject. Zachary says Auburn proved something last year. Malzahn kind of thinks that too. For Will Muschamp to say, well, the SEC West is just Alabama, that's all it's really been, Malzahn says, hey, our team beat Alabama a year ago and may have been the only team in the SEC was capable of doing that. Let me let you hear Gus Malzahn on that subject.
We got a lot of guys coming back, and we felt all along this year that we were the only team that could beat Alabama. Of course, it ended up being that way, and we got a lot of guys coming back. I know they're very hungry. And anytime you've been close and you have everybody coming back or a lot of guys coming back, it really helps you. And I know we're going to be a hungry team. Now, you got to earn it in our league. The SEC West is a monster. Every week you got to bring your lunch. But I really like where we're at.
Joel T. Brown in the comment section says he, meaning Will Muschamp, is telling the truth. Based on what we just heard from Gus Malzahn right there, I don't think Malzahn thinks Muschamp's telling the truth.
No, I don't think he does either. And I think that's obviously, I don't listen, there's no, coach in the SEC West or East is going to come out and be like, man, they are really just blowing us away on the other side. I don't know what we're going to do to keep up. But I calculated the record, and this is the stat I had for you today. I
always love when Mike gets the abacus out to start bringing some stats.
I calculated the record, SEC West versus SEC East last year. What do you think the record was?
Oh, I don't know.
The West was the winning team, I'll tell you.
Okay. Was it 70%, 75%?
11-3. SEC West versus SEC East last year. And that blew my mind. That's the only reason I even brought it up, because I was sitting there going, and by the way, 2 of those losses were Arkansas. And so the other loss, I think, was, I'm trying to remember what it was, but I mean, Ole Miss went 2-0 in the, versus the SEC East. Georgia even lost, as much as Georgia carried the torch during the regular season, they lost to an SEC West team. And so there are still some tough losses going on. And I understand what Muschamp is saying, but I think a lot of those SEC West teams, as much as some of them have floundered, are still in a better spot than some of the torchbearers across the way.
Bull Molinari says South Carolina is A&M's rival from the other division. They lose every year. This is pillow talk. So, I mean, it is kind of an interesting point that for Muschamp to say that, and they've had some trouble with the A&M side of that rival.
Yeah, they have. I mean, they lost last year to Texas A&M, and so it is puzzling. I understand what Will Muschamp's trying to say. I don't think that Will Muschamp meant to go down that road, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of teams from the West have been very good. I mean, we talked about LSU and Auburn. There's even a Heisman Trophy in the West a few years ago to Johnny Manziel, and so that's just something
that's a good point, too.
I mean, that's the big thing.
David Huddleston says, if you're going to say that Alabama is the SEC West and the SEC East is just Georgia, and I don't know that the SEC East is just Georgia, but Georgia's rise last season does give this division something it hasn't had in a while. If you're right, 11-3, that's a pretty strong record for the West against the East, but I mean, the SEC East is the reigning SEC champion now. This is a division pride thing. I'm just saying, it has been a long time since the SEC East has produced a team good enough to have won the SEC. So things have at least changed in that regard.
It makes me feel old, because that was back in 2000.
The last time that an East team was good enough to win, even Mike was.
I'm going bald now when I was in college. Last time that was able to happen, but I think it's something that I do feel is balancing out. I think that I look at the coaching hires that were made as far as the East goes against the West. I love Dan Mullen. Obviously, I love the hire of Jimbo Fisher, but I do feel like a lot of those East teams are headed back towards the top.
Wayne Poole, this is on a different subject. He says, Facebook has changed things up. I cannot like people's comments. I can still like people's comments, Wayne. I just like yours. Maybe we can get some help to Wayne there in the comment section for maybe what he needs to do. I mean, I will say that that Mike or I neither one are great technology people. I feel like Facebook's slightly different every day when I come on. I feel like my own Facebook feed changes slightly day to day. So y'all might be able to help our buddy Wayne out there.
I do got a quick story with that. I went and got a new iPhone last night. Okay. I stepped in the AT&T store, and the guy was like, "When's the last time?"
You can't have that money.
The guy was like, "When's the last time you backed it up?" I said, "Man, I have no idea. Check it out for me." 154 weeks since I backed up my iPhone. It had never been backed. It's been 3 years since I bought that
I get a
phone.
message about that every single day. I don't even know what that means.
I don't either. It's been 3 years since I bought a new phone. It's never been backed up.
All right, so we'll keep this subject going in the comment section. You can check us out there on the whether you're watching on YouTube. Mike's got that pulled up. On Facebook, I've got that pulled up. I'll also pull up the YouTube side of things here in just a moment as well. For now, though, let's do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but I actually do a show in the morning called Dog Nation Daily. I don't know that I've ever brought that up on this program at any point.
I thought we were about to get a new barrage of knowledge. I was like, I can't wait.
You may not be aware of that, but I do the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans from DogNation.com. Lucky enough today to have former Georgia running back Sony Michel on the program. Sony talked about not only his career at Georgia and what a fine finish it was for him in 2017, but also his future. We talked yesterday about the possibility that Sony Michel could be a first-round draft pick this spring. Well, Sony says that's at least an idea that he's entertained the possibility of. Here is Sony Michel.
I mean, ultimately, first round would be amazing. I mean, I think that would be anybody's dream, ideal dream, but that's something I try to not focus on. My focus is to do the best that I can do once I get in front of these coaches. And at the end of the day, it's ultimately their decision. They're going to pick the players they feel the need for their teams, and I only can control what I can control.
It's kind of an interesting conversation with him today because I asked him, and you can speak to this because you also transitioned from college to the NFL, and I asked him, we hear draft preparations, we know what that means, NFL Combine, Pro Day, things like that.
Yeah.
But what is the preparation side of it really like? Is it like getting ready for a game? And somebody said, yeah, in a lot of ways it is. The same mental approach you take to a game, you take to the NFL draft prep work. I guess the difference here is, and for you, it's probably more about your bench work and things like that. For him, it may be more about the 40 time, but there's so much pressure in something that, I don't know, if you're strong, I guess you're strong every day.
Yeah.
But speed, when it comes to like a hundredth of a second, I mean, that's a pretty pressure-packed moment for a guy like Sony as a running back, one of those skill positions.
It is very much like a game, but you got to realize it's longer. And Sony Michel is a perfect example of this because he's in a lot of the same timeline I was. I mean, I got done with the national title game. I think it was like January maybe 8th or 9th back when I was in college. I mean, a week later, I'm down in Mobile. I mean, there's like no transition time. You're still trying to get like healthy from the nicks and dings, the ankle, twist and the shoulder you might have the sore. All of a sudden, you're at that. And then you're getting ready for these next things. You're getting ready for the combine. You're getting ready to go through these pro days. And it's not like it's just a 3-hour game. I mean, when you're at the combine and you're there for 4 days, you are on the whole time. And it's like, you talk about being like mentally exhausting. You're walking around, there's a scout here, there's a president there, there's a head coach there. You're trying to make sure you're acting and on all your P's and Q's at all times walking through the hallway. There's like 3 or 4 events like that during the spring leading up to the NFL draft. And it is tough. It is mentally exhausting for guys
Let's see how well you know our audience. Cliff Nelson's responding on this comment. What do you think he's talking about?
Talking about LSU putting players in the NFL.
Yeah, he's like, Darius Guy's going to be the best running back. It's like, he can't even let Sony Michel have 5 minutes in the sun to talk about his own draft future. He's like, Darius Guy's going to be the best running back in the NFL this year.
I love it, man. Cliff never wavers. We've been doing this show almost a year now. Cliff never wavers in his attention to LSU and the NFL and stuff like that.
That is exactly right. There is no doubt about that. Now, Artwan Fomby in the comment section also reminding Sony Michel that the only team to have beaten both Georgia and Alabama this year was Auburn. He says WDE. We know what that stands for, War Eagle with something in between. But Artwan kind of feeling good about his team, Auburn, being able to do something that Sony's team was not able to do, which was beat Alabama this year.
And I think that's so fair to bring up on the show, too, because obviously, Auburn is one of those teams. You're a Georgia guy and an Alabama guy, but that's a team that should have a lot of pride going into this offseason. As much as it was that Georgia and Alabama obviously playing the national title game, they beat both those squads. And Gus Malzahn, for all the questions that was asked about him a year ago, think about all the great things that Auburn team did. Obviously, you have to build off of it. I think they did a decent job in recruiting. It's going to be tough to replace some of the players going in this year. But Auburn fans, for all the things that have happened to them, should feel pretty good this offseason.
Michael T. Nelson says he thinks Sony Michel's a third-round pick. The truth is, I don't really follow draft that closely, but based on what I think I'm hearing higher than third round for Sony Michel.
You just never know. And Kate Thompson brings up a good point. Sony was unstoppable at times last year. He could have won a Heisman if he wasn't splitting the carries with Nick Chubb and DeAndre Swift. And I think that's so true. I think that's one of those things you look at and say, man, what could have been, But honestly, when you look at it from an NFL perspective, he didn't have as many hits, he didn't have as many carries, and so the scouts probably look at that as a plus move in the next level.
I think so too. And for me on Sony Michel, and if you don't watch every minute of Georgia football, you don't really probably realize this, but in 2015, when Nick Chubb got injured, Sony Michel rushed for almost 1,300 yards that year. Took the full load, became the between the tackles runner. That to me proved everything you need to know about Sony Michel. He's more than just the sort of scat back, guy that can, be a slot receiver and show some elusiveness and speed. He can be a tough between the tackles runner as well, and he showed that for Georgia some this year too.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And listen, I don't know where he's going to land. You always hear like this guy's a first-round guy, and there's always like 60 names that are first-round guys.
Yeah.
So it's like not all these guys can go in the first round. So I think it is somewhere between second and fourth when you talk about Sony Michel, but running backs they don't bounce up that. I saw Darius Geis. I think he was labeled as like a 24th overall in one of the latest mock drafts. So I don't know where Sony Michel slots in behind him, but I do have that feeling like you look at a guy like Kareem Hunt, somebody that had a lot of success last year. Sony Michel kind of fits that role for me.
What round were you drafted in? I forgot.
Third. The very end of the third.
That's a pretty big deal.
Very last pick on Friday night. I already packed my stuff up for the day. I was like, okay, we'll just wait till tomorrow. Very last pick of Friday night.
Now, third round pick, is that announced on television, or is that one of those deals where like at that point in time, you don't necessarily.
Yeah, there was nobody at the podium for it, I don't think. But I think Chris Berman was doing it at the time and said it on.
It comes like Falcons next week.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, what a moment that must have been.
It was. It was a great moment. I did cry.
I would have cried.
Listen, I had a bunch of people at my house. I didn't want anybody at my house. My mom was like, you know what? You're just gonna have to shut up and just listen to me, because I was like, Friday or Saturday. But I went upstairs and I got away from everybody, and I thought it was going to be the next day. And then all of a sudden I looked down and a 770 area code is calling my phone, and I was like, oh my God, this is going to be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, staying relatively close to home, I had to feel
yeah,
pretty good.
I mean, you know, I mean, you could have been New England, Seattle, it could have been San Diego.
Something tells me you wouldn't have necessarily fit in some NFL towns.
I don't know.
Playing in Seattle, playing in New England, places like that.
Green Bay wouldn't have been a good spot for me.
I don't know that it's exactly where the Pensacola boy is going to be the happiest. Good for you. That's a great story.
Yeah.
All right, speaking of Mike's alma mater, the Alabama Crimson Tide, let's make them the subject of item number 3 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And Craig Kuligowski has been hired as the brand new Alabama defensive line coach. And as Ryan Fowler said on the Alabama podcast yesterday, this may be a bit of a secret weapon for the Tide. Maybe not the name we initially thought was going to get that job, but a guy that may end up doing some big things for Alabama, a slightly different profile than we've come to expect from Alabama coaches. Fowler made this point and then brought on the guy who broke the news at first that Craig Kuligowski may be on his way to Tuscaloosa. It's Bruce Feldman from Sports Illustrated. Here's what Feldman said he liked about Craig Kuligowski, this from the Alabama SEC Country podcast.
And so I think you see what he's able to do developing talent. It's not like he's been, recruiting a lot of 5-star guys, but he has been developing a lot of 4 and 5-star talent. I mean, even in Miami, just in the 2 years there, I thought he really upgraded what they were able to do. I've talked to coaches who faced him and faced his defensive lines. They may not know him personally, but they know the product on the field has been really, really impressive. And so, within the business, he's regarded as one of the best defensive line coaches in the country just because the work and the product speaks for itself.
So, I mean, is this, not a guy with some huge recruiting background, as Bruce Feldman also explained in that same interview? A lot of the guys that had the most success at Missouri were not 4-star prospects coming out of high school. These were like 2- and 3-star guys that he sort of developed into potential first-round talents in the NFL draft, or in Michael Sam's case, a guy that had great success at the college level. I mean, is this what Alabama needs right now? A quote player development guy? I mean, something about this doesn't make sense to me, despite the fact that Kuligowski's track record of producing good defensive lines is unquestioned.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me, and I think that obviously in the long run, you ask the questions about recruiting. What is Kuligowski going to be able to do on the trail? Is he going to be, where's his territory going to be? Is it going to be in South Florida? Is it going to be in some of these other places? That remains to be seen. But when I judge the hire, I also look at the talent that's on the roster and how much they're losing along the defensive line and what the ceiling could possibly be for a guy like Christian Miller, who was an incredible recruit and, obviously got nicked up a little bit last year. What can a guy like Kuligowski do with Christian Miller and Keenan Williams and some of the other names you haven't heard about yet that were huge prospects coming in to their college careers? I think it's going to be huge. I think it's at least going to be huge for the next year. Obviously, like I said, a lot still has to be panned out on the recruiting trail, but I don't see any reason why Alabama fans shouldn't be ecstatic, at least for the time being.
Rick Keene says he's a sub-recruiter. The phone call the recruits want to hear is from the head coach and the coordinators. The problem, though, at a place like Alabama, you've got to have those position coaches who are doing that kind of stuff, because this is not like, a more middle-tier SEC school where a head coach can take a lot of the sort of lead role in one of recruiting. Nick Saban does not have time to do that. And Alabama's recruiting so many 5-star guys. You're going to be careful about playing favorites with a lot of these guys, because all of a sudden at that point in time you anger one because of how hard you're working on another. I mean, at a place like Alabama, when you're trying to recruit #1 classes, your position coaches have got to be black belts.
They do. Well, everybody on the staff, really. I mean, when you look at it, and obviously you can look at the Georgia staff, the Alabama staffs of the past, the teams that really have come in with the #1 rankings, it's like every year there's like a Broyles finalist. There's like some guy that's up for like recruiter of the year as far as like the rival sites go. And you've seen that in Kirby Smart. You've seen that in Jeremy Pruitt at Alabama. You've seen that in Tosh Lapoy. And I think you've got to surround him with other guys that can develop as well. But you're right. I mean, those guys have to open those doors. They have to be able to sit down on people's couch when they make these trips. Nick Saban can't go to everybody's house 10 times and make that visit and do those dinners. So these guys have to be good on their own.
So last year when you play Alabama, you were horrified about Raekwon Davis and Deron Payne. You're horrified by them. They just cause so many problems for opposing offenses. Give me the coach that brings those guys in more so than the thought of, I got Craig Kuligowski, he's going to sort of spin gold out of yarn. Man. Give me the guy that brings Raekwon Davis to campus. That's the guy I want coaching my defensive line.
But here's the thing I'm trying to hammer home is that Raekwon Davis is there right now. Raekwon Davis doesn't go anywhere. Raekwon Davis will be coached by Craig Kuligowski next year, so he is going to reach some. And then you have guys, Isaiah Buggs. That's a guy who at the end of last year really stepped up, was a JUCO signee last year. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and it remains to be seen in my eyes, but I do get excited when I think about the talent they already have.
And let me just be very clear, and we're going to change the subject about the Florida Gators here for a moment. I am not saying it's a bad hire. Objectively, it's pretty well a good hire. This is a defensive line coaching position. We have gotten the best in the country. It's just a very different profile than what we expect Nick Saban to go.
Yeah,
to me, it's more of a Travis Jones type name that sort of was the more perfect fit here. This does not seem to be the Alabama fit. It's for me confusing, but I'm not going to criticize and say it's a bad hire.
I completely agree. I mean, I looked at I thought about Todd Bates, a guy who went to Alabama, who's a Clemson defensive line coach right now. I thought about guys who would fit in that, and Kuligowski never came up. And you mentioned, I mean, look at everybody. Jeff Banks, Josh Gaddis, Pete Golding, all the other assistant coaches they brought in, energetic young guys that can recruit. He doesn't really go along that same thing, but listen, I don't think anybody's going to complain about it.
Florida will make them the subject matter number 4 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And, with the new staff comes a lot of new names onto the coaching, positions. We paid a lot of attention to Dan Mullen here as of late, but Dan Mullen's not the only new coaching name for the Florida fans down there in Gainesville to get used to. Some of those defensive guys met with the media this week. I want to give you a little bit of audio from a lot of these guys, including, let me start with Christian Robinson, if you don't mind for a moment. He's going to be working as a part of this Florida staff under Dan Mullen. This is a pretty young guy, certainly young to be working on an SEC coaching staff, and ironically, in Robinson's case, a guy that actually got his start in football by playing for one of Florida's biggest rivals, Georgia. Is that a weird situation for Christian Robinson? Here's what C-Rob had to say about that.
I think as a young football player, with social media, Twitter just got started when I showed up at the University of Georgia. You learn once you get out in the real world that you're loyal to people. And, obviously the people that I'm working for now were my coaches. And that's what's exciting to me. And being with Coach Grantham, he's taught me most of my football life. And so to be a part of that, I mean, I'm going to be loyal to the people that we work with every day, the people who are up at 5 a.m. and making sure I give my relentless effort for them. There's no question where my loyalty lies.
And listen, I totally get that. I mean, I grew up in an era when Vince Dooley was coaching at Georgia, graduated from Auburn. Pat Dye was coaching at Auburn, graduated from Georgia. And, loyalties for the guys in the profession are more about the people who hire you, more so than the school that you went to. So, it's a little bit of a juxtaposition to see video of a Georgia player now talking about sort of recruiting and coaching for Auburn, for Florida. But money talks. If you're going to pay to coach, then that's the school you like now.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's an interesting dynamic. I mean, I think Pat Dye was actually a coach under Bear Bryant at Alabama before he goes over to Auburn. So there are those transitions, and we had a couple of coaches when I was at Alabama that were Auburn grads, and it is interesting to see the dynamic. I mean, you understand that it is a business, and a lot of those times those guys will bounce around. I think that's honestly, when I think about something like that, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think that's what makes it so special to see a guy like Kirby that's gone home to be at his alma mater. I think when I see coaches go home to be at their alma mater and have success the way Kirby does, I think it's a special thing because all of a sudden all these stars align for some of these guys and they're just, hey, I'm here for the long run of this.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little bit nervous when they first hired Kirby in that they were going to try to sell this as the reason why you'd be successful. I don't think it's the reason why you are successful, but I do think there's something really fun about seeing a guy who clearly loved Georgia getting to coach the place where he loved. And for most of these guys, it's just a timing situation. I mean, would Christian Robinson like to have coached at his alma mater? I imagine he probably would, but the defensive coach that he had was at Mississippi State and now at Florida, and that's the loyalty that he has. And honestly, I mean, if you really to sort of quarantine, see Rob off in a room, do you like Todd Grantham more? Do you like Georgia more? He may like Grantham more because that's the coach that he played for.
No, I don't see anything wrong with that either. And you mentioned it. That's not why you're successful. And listen, the recruiting pitch I got when I was going to college, Mike Shula sat right there on my couch. He's like, "It's my dream job. I'm not going anywhere. I was the quarterback here. I'm going to be at Alabama forever." And then 2 years later, of course, Mike Shula's gone. So that doesn't make you successful at all, but it is special when you are both at your alma mater and successful.
Greg Steele says the reason why Christian Robinson went to Florida, he wants to win a national championship. You can't blame him. Yeah, listen, these Florida fans, they'll remind you.
It makes me feel so old that this guy's an assistant coach at Florida right now. He was on his way into college when I was leaving college. What is he, like 27? That's unbelievable.
Ron English, the new safeties coach at Florida, he also spoke to the media, and he's really excited about being in Gainesville.
Excited to be here, happy to be here. Understand that this is one of the great programs in the country, and a great opportunity for student athletes, both athletically and academically. When you talk about the #9 ranked public school.
Yeah, you can tell that's a really big thing that they want to try to sell there is, it seems like from listening to recruits really closely, and I try to follow that aspect of college football a lot, academics, and it's going to kind of sound weird, academics are a little bit more in vogue now. People are, a lot more players are making choices on the basis of academics, or at least they're putting teams in the top.
That's the vibe they're putting out, for sure.
Yeah, they're putting teams in the top 5 because of academics. But if Florida can sell itself as a good academic school, that becomes a good thing to sell.
I think you do. I mean, listen, you look at just the linebacker position, because we were just talking about the linebackers coach. The linebackers they signed last year were some of the best linebackers they've signed in the last 5. I mean, when you talk about Chatfield and, who's the other guy I can't think of? David Reese. I mean, those are 2 of the best linebackers that Florida's signed in a while. So I do think it's important to mesh the 2. It's important to see for these recruits that their school is well-rounded, that they fit in with the team, that they fit into the city, and they can also get the best of the education. So I love pouring it on. I think you're right, though. It's an in vogue thing here recently where you look at some of these recruits and, man, it's not that it's never been talked about, but it seems to be like a more important factor when they come up with interviews now.
Maurice Carter and Dedrick Frazier both having a hard time getting used to seeing Christian Robinson in the orange and blue. Rick Keene, who's a Florida fan, though, sounds like he's using his brain on becoming a Florida Gator. One more Florida assistant coach I want to give you a chance to hear from. One of the new defensive backs coaches, Charlton Warren. Well, his background involves more than just football. He's also got a little tie to the Air Force here, bringing some of that military background to Gainesville. Here's what Charlton Warren said about that.
Out of high school, I attended United States Air Force Academy, played DB out there. After graduation, I was commissioned as an officer in the Air Force. I served for 10 years, became a major on active duty.
So, I mean, what do you think about bringing in a coach with the military background? That's probably a little tough.
Listen, I love it, man. Because you know what happens in a lot of these situations, and Scott Cochran does the same thing. There are strength coaches and assistant coaches all over the SEC that do this. They pull up videos of like the Navy SEALs. They pull, all these guys are going to talk about military training, and we're going to go through boot camp, and we're going to do this. Like, this guy's been there. I mean, he doesn't have to make this up. He can be like, listen, I've been in this spot. This is going to be tough, but you can definitely make your way through it. And I think that's important when you talk about assistant coaches these days.
Brandon Hess says Florida's a top 5 job in America. I believe that still can be true. It's one of the reasons why, as a Georgia guy, I emphasize the Florida rivalry so much, because I think over the course of time, it's a good measuring stick for a program like Georgia. It's been a while since Florida's felt like the top 5 job in the country, but the guys we just heard from, Charlton Warren, Ron English, and Christian Robinson, along with Dan Mullen and the new coordinators, I mean, it really is their job to sort of reestablish that status. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Florida's getting number 1 recruiting classes, winning national championships, and it was the envy of most of college football. It's been apart from that kind of legacy now for a while, but that's what the Florida guys got to get it back to, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think one of the most important benchmarks when I was in school was when we were able to, my junior year, beat Auburn for the first time in 6 years at Alabama. That was kind of the benchmark. It was like, we started checking things off, and what do they call it, the redemption tour or whatever, So you start going back through your schedule, and hey, you know what? Let's beat LSU this year. They've been, they won a national title in 07. We're able to beat them in 08. So it's one of those things you got to balance out and find your way through, and they're always good to have that benchmark. So I think that's a good one for Florida and Georgia between the 2.
Let me do item number 5 here on our SEC Country First and 10 list. We played some audio from Bruce Feldman a little earlier. Feldman had made an appearance on the Ryan Fowler Alabama SEC Country podcast. Feldman, a pretty busy guy here, though, as of late. Also made an appearance on the Birmingham sports radio station WJOX. And in kind of a wide-ranging conversation, the subject came up of expectations for Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. Feldman makes the comparison between another high-paid coach, Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and is the weight of expectations Harbaugh is dealing with in Ann Arbor, is that going to be too much for Jimbo Fisher at College Station? Here is Bruce Feldman from WJOX talking about the future of Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M.
At what point do you get to this Jim Harbaugh point that we seem to be at with Michigan, where if you do not get to the playoff within, was it 3 years? Is it 4 years? Where are we on this? That's the question I would have, because remember, Kevin Sumlin went 11-2 and had a top 5 season his first year at A&M, and then all of a sudden it was a bunch of 8-win seasons, and that clearly wasn't good enough. So, I think at some point within the first, at least 3 years, Jimbo Fisher has to get, I think, them into, within the top 10, if not to the playoff, because they're paying a ton of money for it.
So for me, I have a very simple response to this. I think it's probably true that Jimbo Fisher does have about 3 years to have some really big-time success at Texas A&M, or there's going to be a problem. But what I'm also saying in response to that is, Who in the SEC is that not true?
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, Derek Mason, you want to exclude him. Mark Stoops, you want to exclude him. Barry Odom, you want to exclude him. I mean, for the most part, there's really no SEC coach that's not 3 years away from looking for a new job if he's not in the very least in the top 10, if not being, really on the doorstep of being the college football player.
Not even 3 years. Yeah. I mean, look at Gus Malzahn right now. Gus Malzahn is feeling all the pressure. You look at a guy like Ed Orgeron. He's got to reverse the trend that LSU's been hit to. Even a guy like Matt Luke. I mean, Matt Luke is on top of the world right now. We talked about guys going to their alma mater, but he's almost still kind of viewed as like a Band-Aid. Like, how soon can he win? How many games can he get on top of some of these? Continue to beat Mississippi State, make a run at trying to not get blown out by Alabama this year. Matt Luke has got a ton of pressure on him. So that was kind of my initial response to it too. Every coach in the SEC and every coach in a lot of these Power 5 conferences feel the same way. Jimbo Fisher, I think, almost even feels like, Jimbo Fisher has $75 million guaranteed. They're going to give him a leash. I mean, they're going to let him stick around for a little while. They're not just going to say, hey, that's $75 million. Let's just flush that down the toilet.
And Jerry Lewis in the comment section makes a similar point. He says, if I were Jimbo, I'd say, who cares if I'm in the hot seat? I'm making bank. And there is a degree to which that's true, in which that if you're the A&M administration that's given Jimbo Fisher all that money, maybe you are, feeling the need to sort of stretch the truth just a little bit to make him seem like he is a success. Otherwise, you're the fool who gave this guy $75 million.
And Kate Thompson in the comment section on YouTube says, I think Texas A&M is like the Saudi Arabia of college football. It has more money than they know what to do. Yeah. That's such a good point. Yeah, that's such a good point.
That is a really good point, and that very well may be the case here. But, we have this situation about hot seat. Which coach in the hot seat, which coach is not. I'll say somebody is. There'll be some, blue check brigade, super serious reporter who says, how can you say so-and-so's in the hot seat? There's really no such thing in the SEC as the hot seat. You either had a good season, you need to have a good season, or you're getting fired. I mean, it's sort of a 3-year process of there's really no coach that's more than 1 year away from being on the hot seat. I mean, go to the very top here for a moment if you want to. Let's just think out loud. What if Nick Saban went 9-3 this year?
Yeah.
If he went 9-3 in 2018, by 2019, if he is not back in the college football playoff, Alabama fans would want him gone.
Yeah, I don't think anybody'd be calling for his job after one bad year, but there'd be a ton of questions. You say, what's wrong with Nick right now?
Yeah. They're not going to say he needs to be gone after a 9-3 season in 2018. But if he were in 2019 to not get back to where Alabama had been, Nick Saban's no more immune to this kind of conversation than anybody else is.
Yeah.
Go back to a little younger guy, Kirby Smart, in the college football playoff this year. If Georgia's 8-4 next year, in 2019, people are going to be saying, hey, was this a one-year wonder? Is this a fluke? I mean, we all care about this stuff a lot. The coaches get paid a lot of money to sort of satisfy our, desire to be entertained here. The downside is expectations are high.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with your point as well. There's no scenario I can think of, though, where anybody would fire Nick Saban. I can't make that up in my mind. I mean, he'd have to go 0-12 for like 3 straight years, I think, before they give him a pink slip.
See, the difference here is I don't think you get 3. I don't think anybody gets 3.
Really?
I don't think anybody.
I don't think Nick Saban gets 3 years after winning 5 national titles at Alabama.
Can you imagine, this is just all hypothetical, but can you imagine 9-3 this year, 9-3 in 2018, or I should say 2019. Can you imagine what a show like this would be like in the off season between 2019 and 2020? We'd be hearing from Alabama fans saying, he's 60-something-year-old Nick Saban, the game's passed him by, it's time to be thinking about somebody else. It's not the other fan base who'd be saying this. We'd be hearing from Alabama fans on that side.
No, yeah, and what's crazy about it, too, is there was guys in college that were coaches at their schools that I didn't think were touchable. I mean, I honestly did not think Tommy Tuberville would ever get shown the door. Philip Fulmer was the same way. I didn't think Philip Fulmer would ever be fired. When I showed up to college, Philip Fulmer to me, I was like, there's no way. And I thought the same thing about Les Miles for many years. How does a guy like Les Miles, who's been to 2 national title games and won one, how would he ever be fired? And yet there we were a couple of years ago.
All right, a couple more comments here. Bo Molinari, who is an A&M fan, says Jimbo might have high expectations, but at least A&M's giving him the tools to win with. And I think Bo's making a pretty good point here to kind of confound what Bruce Feldman said on the WJOX interview. I don't think that A&M is scared of, we're paying this guy so much money, therefore we have to win. I think they're paying him all that money because they think he's going to win. I think A&M thinks they're getting a good deal here because they bought a national championship winning coach, which is something that most of the SEC does not currently have.
Yeah.
So I don't think A&M thinks oh gosh, what do we do now? We may have bitten off more than we can chew. I think they're ready to sit down and eat this meal.
No, I think they are too. And listen, I got to give A&M credit on that front too, because I think we asked questions about, man, is he overpaid? Is it too much money guaranteed? But listen, they set their sights on him. For all the things that were going on at a place like Tennessee with Greg Schiano in and out, and then all of a sudden John Curry's fired, A&M was just like, listen, this is the coach we want. We want a national title winning coach, and we're going to give him whatever amount of money it takes to get him on campus here. And I think there's something to be said for that.
A couple more comments, and we're going to talk about Sean Dion Hamilton. Esteban Estevez says Jimbo's going to have success because of his name for the next 2 to 3 years. After that, A&M's going to drop back down to the middle of the SEC. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think year one is hard for any SEC coach, be it experienced, be it inexperienced. We've just seen too many examples of that. The track record sort of speaks for itself for guys in their first year. But, I mean, if he sort of breaks through in Texas and sort of cracks that code in terms of bringing in talent there, why would it only be a 1 or 2 year thing? He either doesn't translate, it doesn't work out there the way it worked for a few years in Florida. The 2013 Florida State team was one of the best teams in college football history. It either doesn't work at all, or it's going to work for many years. Why would it only work for 1 or 2?
So you're going boom or bust when you talk.
Kind of, right?
I see. I disagree, because listen, I look at a guy. Look at his predecessor, Kevin Sumlin. It was like, man, it worked, and he was on the right track, and he's putting guys in the first round, and he's getting good recruiting classes, and then it's like, man, we're decent, but we need to get to new heights.
Yeah, but he never had better than a 2-loss regular season, right? I mean, the 2012 team, which was I think 10-2, was the best record he ever had there. Jimbo Fisher's going to have a team that has a better record than 10-2.
What I'm saying, I think that fits. I think Kevin Sumlin fits somewhere in the middle, is what I'm saying. I don't think you'd call him a bust as a head coach. I mean, he had a decent tenure and did a lot of good things, but he wasn't a boom either. Like, he didn't take over the state of Texas like probably a lot of A&M fans want.
And one more final point here. Cliff Nelson says if they'd given the money to Sumlin in terms of the resources they're giving to Jimbo, he would have had more success. The truth is, I mean, they bought John Chavis at a time when that was a big deal.
That was a big deal.
I don't know why it didn't work out better, but Chavis was not the same DC in College Station, and A&M.
I can't help but every time I think of John Chavis at A&M, do you remember when he was like standing on the field and the security guard was like, no, sir, no, sir, you have to get off the field.
That may
I don't know what you're doing out here.
That may have been the symbol that things were not going to end the right way.
To me.
All right, let's talk about Sean Dion Hamilton here, item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live 1st and 10. We addressed Sonny Michel a little early in the program, trying to make that transition to the NFL. Sean Dion Hamilton trying to do the same thing, except for him, it's also a return from injury here. The looks, though, from a video that Sean Dion put out on Twitter, he's apparently feeling pretty good these days. Let's take a look at the video. Mike, tell me what you see and what you think about this. So kind of running here, showing some lateral quickness, some vertical quickness. I mean, Sean Dion Hamilton overall looking pretty good there.
No, I mean, it's incredible. I mean, when you think about the timeline, and I think this happened in the LSU game, if I'm not mistaken, like somewhere around like November 7th or something along those lines. I mean, the timeline of that, it's absolutely mind-boggling. For anybody that's ever had like a knee injury or has dealt with an ACL, to think that that guy tore that on January 7th and he's having that much push where he can redirect and do all those drills right now is insane. I mean, obviously that's a calculated video that has a lot to do with the upcoming combine and things of that nature. So it's like, hey, let's put out a video that makes it, look extremely good. But still, to me, enough cannot be said about a kid who had that injury 2 years in a row, got dealt a bad hand, and I mean, he is fighting for all he can in that video, the way it looks to me.
If I'm not mistaken, the pride of Carver High School in Montgomery, Alabama.
I think you're right.
I believe.
Yeah, I think you are right.
What I almost get concerned about a little bit is so many of these superhuman athletes have these superhuman injury recoveries now that for someone like me, it's almost becoming difficult to even sort of quantify what is a normal rehab?
Right, yeah.
Because guys do it so fast now. They do it so well. And in some cases, they're better than they were before. In other cases, they're just as good as they were before. But the timeline on all this is so accelerated that now it's like we're almost spoiled to think if a guy tears his knee apart, well, he's going to be back in, 2 or 3 months because that's what people seem to be doing.
I mean, it seems like when you first started hearing a lot about these procedures kind of speeding up, I mean, when I was in like high school, it's like a year. I mean, think about like watching like Friday Night Live, like Booby Miles. I mean, that guy had like the ACL injury. He's like done. You know what I mean?
He's going to the pros.
Yeah, he's like done. And
so he was going to the pros.
Look at it now. Guy tears his ACL in the spring. I mean, he's back by fall camp. He's taking reps in fall camp. It blows my mind. It really does.
Poor Booby Miles, his career was over. I mean, he's never going to play football again.
He was done.
If they'd send him back to the trainer today, he'd be back on the field in the second half.
It's crazy to me. It really is. It goes. I mean, obviously, I don't know how many baseball fans they have, but Tommy John surgery is like Tommy John used to be like a 2-year injury. Now it's like 6 months. You're throwing like 5 mile an hour harder.
By the way, to go back to the topic from before, Christopher P. Shooter Smith says that Ed Orgeron's going to prove my point that he's going to be gone after this year if he doesn't win. That's Christopher P. Shooter Smith in the comments section. That's a pretty good example of what I'm talking about. This is LSU that settled on Orgeron. He's a popular figure in state, but LSU wants to win, and you better believe they're not giving him 5 years. It's either show me something in the first 3 or 4. You're gone after 5.
No, I think that's what makes LSU fans so nervous. You had Nick Saban, and obviously did a lot of good things. And Les Miles continued that trend. He kept their head above water. He kept like the status quo for the next, what was it, 10 years he was there after Nick Saban. And you could still see the #1 recruiting classes. You could still see guys going to the NFL. You could still see them appearing in national championship games and SEC championship games. Now it's how far are we going to fall before we say, you know what, enough of this, and we got to start building back in that direction. I think that's what's scary. I mean, LSU fans, you tell me, I think that's what's scary for you guys.
Michael Clyburn in the comment section, to go back to the Jimbo Fisher topic, says Jimbo Fisher's overrated. I also think there's an issue where Michael's mad at you because he says we're not talking enough Mississippi State.
Why is he mad at me?
I just like to think he's mad at you.
Mississippi State topics. I'd love talking Mississippi State.
I'd like to think he's mad at you. Maybe he's just mad at both of us, and maybe that's why he's saying that about Jimbo Fisher. Nonetheless, let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Cory Raymond, the LSU defensive backs coach, was on a sports radio station in Baton Rouge earlier this week, and he talked about the position change for Manny Netherly, a guy that had been a wide receiver, brought to LSU to do that. But because I'm going to assume here some of the recruiting misses in 2018, not getting Patrick Surtain Jr., for instance, that opens up a spot for Manny Netherly to maybe play the defensive back position. It also brings to mind a tweet, and I thought this was a really good one from Daniel Jeremiah the other day, who covers like the NFL draft. He's like a scout's eye type guy working for the NFL Network, and he tweeted out from his account, Move the Sticks. He says, I always put this out there during this time of year for high school coaches, parents. If your kid excels at wide receiver and cornerback, push him to play cornerback. Every year we evaluate 1 million wide receivers, and we try to look in the bushes to find extra cornerbacks. Daniel Jeremiah obviously knows this subject very well. Is that good advice for Manny Netherly here? Sight unseen, does he have a better chance now of making the NFL as a defensive back than he would have in a more crowded competition as wide receiver?
If you're a good one. See, I think what you're missing here is I think it's harder to be a great corner than it is to be a great wide receiver. So yeah, push your kid to be a cornerback, but guess what? You have to be a notch above the other corners. I think that's what he's kind of missing when he talks about that statement is, I guess if it's, you're an 8 out of 10 at wide receiver and you're 8 out of 10 at corner, yes, go to cornerback. But it takes a lot more skill, in my opinion, to be a great. I think cornerback's the hardest position on the field.
I do too.
I think it's the hardest position on the field, so it's hard for me to say, man, push your kid to go that way when he might have a little bit more lax time somewhere else.
It's funny that you're saying that because you obviously know what's happening on a football field a lot better than I do. But from the fans' perspective, I think cornerback's one of the most important positions to recruit. I think it's one of the most important positions to develop. Anytime that my team Georgia brings in a 5-star player, if he's got a choice of does he play wide receiver, does he play defensive back, if he can be a quarterback, that's where I want my 5-star athletes because, Bill Conley wrote about this at Football Study Hall the other day, that the hardest thing to sort of replicate year after year is the passes that you knocked out of the air the year before. That's the kind of thing that it takes stud defenders with experience to really be able to do. So you maybe bring up a good point here that just transitioning to defensive back is not necessarily good for you unless you're a good defensive back. But overall, the reason why Cory Raymond and Ed Orgeron and Dave Aranda may want to move Netherly over there because they want to make sure they got enough candidates to find themselves some good defensive backs.
There's no doubt about that. And every year you see this during the spring where offensive linemen go to defensive line. And listen, your numbers are tough. And it's become a lot easier now with a ton of early enrollees. When I was going into school, it was like every year we had like 5 guys switch positions. Listen, one of the best running backs I ever saw, and Alabama fans might remember this name. His name was Ali Sharif. I don't even think he ever got a carry at running back. He all of a sudden switched to safety and had some good playing time and did some good things back at safety. So the trend continues. Trevon Diggs was the same way last year at Alabama. Ended up starting the year as a cornerback this year and then kind of slid down the depth chart a little bit. But sometimes you have to do those things in spring. There's only 5 scholarship cornerbacks right now at LSU. They need that depth.
Greg Steele, who's a Florida fan in the comment section, I don't know why I say he's a Florida fan. This has got nothing to do with who he cheers for. But we were talking about injury recovery. He says he tore his ACL, PCL, MCL at the same time. Luckily, I didn't have to come back and play football. That must have been a horrific injury.
Yeah, I think they call that the something trifecta, something like that. And I've seen guys. I think Dante Hightower did that when I was in college too. It's terrible, and it's hard to bounce back and do the same things that you used to. And it's still going back to the timeline. It still blows my mind how quickly some of these guys are doing.
You've heard of the triple crown? That's more like the triple frown.
Yeah. That's so bad.
I'm really sorry.
I'm
really sorry. That's not even
so bad.
The least bit.
I could see like the thing kind of ticking in your head, like I'm about to throw this one out there.
By the way, Esteban Estevez, speaking of the Manny Netherly subject, says this year Coach O is going to bring back LSU with their recruiting class. 2018 was all about replenishing the front on offense and defense. So he says, hey, don't worry about those defensive backs. Don't worry about missing out Patrick Surtain. He still feels really good here. And listen, I'm just being very blunt. I don't know that LSU is going to have a sterling record on the field this year. So finding some promise in that sort of 2019 recruiting cycle, that might be a pretty good way for Ed Orgeron to buy himself a little bit of time.
And I hate to say this because LSU fans obviously don't want to hear that, but you do have a feeling like it might be a little bit of a transition year for them. With quarterback at some of the other positions, you want to see what Ed Orgeron's going to be able to puff it. I mean, is it going to be status quo for LSU where they go out and win 10 games? I have a hard time believing that's going to be the case, and so you do want to see some of those commits start to pop. By the way, they have like I said the other day, a couple of weeks to signing day, their signing class next year in the state of Louisiana, they have a ton of talent, so Ed Orgeron ought to be able to go out and get it.
All right, let's do item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Justin Ferguson, SECCountry.com, was talking about those freshmen for Auburn, maybe most likely to contribute here in 2018. That is always one of my favorite subjects. You can get me every single time. I want to see my team's freshmen. I want to see everybody else in the SEC. I want to see the freshmen likely to contribute. And there is one name atop the list for Auburn, and frankly, it's a pretty cool name. Here's what Justin Ferguson said. He says, to hear members of Auburn's program say it's Smoke Monday. It's Quindarius is his given name. I guess he's going by Smoke now. Smoke Monday could have played for the Tigers in 2017. Now that Auburn has lost its 2 starting safeties, Monday should be in line for major playing time as an early enrollee in 2018. The Under Armour All-American speedy, physical presence over the top of a defense. Got a huge vote of confidence from 3-year starter Trey Matthews down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile last month. Smoke is definitely going to bring the fire to an Auburn secondary that needs it this fall. I would pay $10,000 of my own money. I have to finance it. I'd pay $10,000 of my own money if tomorrow it was Mike Johnson and Smoke Monday.
Yeah.
What if your name was Smoke Monday?
I can't even imagine it, and obviously, I'm jealous of that name. I have a pretty generic name, so when I see names like that, I'm like, man, it'd be cool to have a name.
Can you imagine? If I don't even know how I'd dress if I was Smoke Monday, but man, you better believe I'd be dressed to the nines every single day.
Doubt. Yeah, I'd be dressed like the Freeze from the Braves games. The races in the outfield have like the onesie on. If my name was Smoke Monday,
can you imagine like you have like we'd get some dry ice machines down here and have the smoke billowing up from everything. If your name is Smoke Monday, you got to live the gimmick.
Yeah, you definitely do. You got to be almost like a pro wrestler persona.
But the point here is Justin Ferguson says that he heard from Auburn coaches that this incoming freshman was good enough to play for Auburn last year when he was still a high school senior. Are you buying that?
Man, that's tough. That's tough. And you know what's really, I can tell how strongly he feels about this because when you look at some of the other names on this list, Calvin Ashley needs to be a big-time player for Auburn. He's been in that program. He got redshirted. He's going to be a freshman. He's at number 2 on that list in terms of guys that can play. Asa Martin, Whitlow, the running backs that they need to kind of come back with. And yet you're talking about a safety. Now, they lost, Trey Matthews, and they lost Stephen Roberts, the other safety back there. But I don't know that I look at him and say, man, that's the most likely. That's a tough position to kind of walk in. But we talked about that. What are the easiest and hardest positions to come in and play? Safeties are pretty tough.
Is that right?
Safeties are pretty
I don't think of safety being nearly as hard as cornerback.
It's almost like playing catcher in baseball, where you have to. You're the guy. You're like the only guy on the field who can see everybody. So you're kind of back there and you're kind of ranging around looking at everybody. And you need a senior kind of leader back there if you're really going to be a dominant defense, in my opinion.
What would be interesting here is, this was a year in which Georgia, dominated recruiting. Auburn had a pretty good year, but not the kind of recruiting in Georgia. Didn't go head-to-head and beat Georgia on a lot of guys. Georgia, for whatever reason, was never really in on Quindarius Monday. I don't know if that's just a relationship deal or what, but it was Auburn for Monday always, and Georgia never really in that. If Monday goes on to be a big-time player, the same thing with the Hill kid from out of Snellville, which is an Atlanta suburb, who's going to play wide receiver. That's a couple guys that Auburn was in on from the state of Georgia that the University of Georgia was not really in on. Georgia fans don't like seeing kids from Georgia have success at Auburn, but Monday would be an example of a kid from the state of Georgia, potentially having success. At least if you believe Justin Ferguson right there.
It is interesting too, and obviously Georgia had a great year. It's interesting to see like what Georgia actually targeted and what they let get away, and how they kind of molded their class. But you're right. For Matthews to come out at the Senior Bowl and mention something about a kid he hasn't even known that long, I think it says a lot about what they think he can be.
Trey Duke says Smoke going to get smoked this year by McCole Hardman. That's one of the Georgia receivers. So that is, I guess, the problem. If your name is Smoke, you're going to get noticed.
Yeah, that's a great point. Back in the secondary, Smoke might not be a good name.
Listen, if you're like some of those Auburn defensive backs who've made some business decisions in the past, if your name is Smoke and you make a business decision to get out of the way, you're going to get noticed for that.
Yeah, you don't want those business decisions to pop up. I'll never forget the Fournette film for Auburn a couple years ago. There's some serious business decisions.
I know exactly what you mean. All right, let's talk about the Tennessee Vols here. Item number 9 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And we yesterday spent probably more time than we should have on Jeremy Pruitt recruiting the city of Memphis. We're making such a big deal about what Pruitt said about, hey, how much they're going to own Memphis. In fact, do we have that quote? Can we show the quote here? This is Pruitt on Memphis. He says, "This is going to be our city. I can tell you that right now. We're going to be here as many opportunities as we can get. We're going to get guys up there. This is going to be a priority for us." Now, it's important to point out that Jeremy Pruitt's saying that to a bunch of Tennessee boosters in the city of Memphis.
Yeah.
Like, he's very much playing to the crowd here. And we still sort of made a big deal about on the show about how important it is to recruit Memphis, blah, blah, blah. Well, come to find out, he gets in the car, drives to Nashville, and says something pretty close to the same dadgum thing. Here is what Pruitt said to the Nashville boosters. "The football in Nashville is really good. There's more people in itself in the surrounding area than anywhere in the state. The football is good. We'll be here. We'll be recruiting." So what do you make of Pruitt making the pitch to a couple Tennessee cities?
This goes along the lines with exactly what I was talking about when he was in Memphis yesterday. I'm like, you know what? That Memphis, this should be easy. This should be like, hey, you're in the state of Tennessee, and I didn't want to just like hone in on Memphis and say, man, that's like a recruiting hotbed. They can't miss on the guys in Memphis. Nashville, in my opinion, is probably it's a bigger deal. I mean, when you look at the Nashville like metropolitan area. A guy from like Murfreesboro goes to Ohio State this year. A guy from Franklin goes up to Ohio State. I mean, there's a lot of talent.
Well, Murfreesboro's not Nashville.
It's the metro area. I mean, it's like it's like I would say it's like Alpharetta in Atlanta. I would think.
I don't think so.
I think it's closer.
I think we need to get a map out for that.
Yeah, maybe so.
But here's the other thing though that's sort of hidden in this, and this is, I hate to say this is why you're wrong, but this is why you're wrong. Let me see the quote. I want you to just hear. I want you to just see this. Let me see the quote from Pruitt talking about Nashville once again. You can sort of catch this in terms of high school football recruiting. He says the football in Nashville is really good. There's more people in itself in the surrounding area than anywhere in the state. That's about the population. That's not about the football that's played there. Now he goes from really good to the football is good. We'll be here. We'll be here recruiting. I mean, that's more one of those lines of, hey, let's get together soon. Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea.
No, you're wrong.
But now watch what he says about Memphis. Let me show you the difference between what he says about Nashville and what he says about Memphis. This is Tennessee coach Jeremy Pruitt once again. He says, this is going to be our city. I can tell you that right now. We're going to be here as many opportunities as we can get. We're going to get guys up there. This is going to be a priority for us. He didn't say that about Nashville. Memphis just got better players than Nashville does.
No, I disagree.
Nashville's a little
I mean, obviously you get, but listen, he even talks about like, how many people live there and how spread out it is. And I understand what you're saying. He didn't like, hammer his fist down on the table, but I think it's important. I think it goes along the lines of the same thing Kirby Smart was preaching when he got to Georgia. You have to put a fence up around the state. You shouldn't have any other team in the state of Tennessee, I apologize to Vanderbilt fans, coming in and getting your players. I know how close Ole Miss is. I know how close Arkansas is. But if you want those players out of the state, you got to be able to go get them.
I mean, can I just get real blunt and honest here for like 2 seconds? The difference between Memphis and Nashville is Nashville's a little bit of a hipster town, right? There's a lot.
I don't think that's blunt at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of hipster vibe going on there. A lot of things not really conducive to playing football. Whereas Memphis is a hard-working town. I mean,
like a blue-collar town?
It's a little bit more blue-collar, a little rougher around the edges, a little tougher. I mean, Nashville, you're eating like a lot of the hoity-toity five-star restaurants.
Drinking a lot of craft beer.
You're eating, a lot of craft beer. In Memphis, you're eating Gus's fried chicken. You're eating, Rendezvous barbecue. You're eating food that sticks to the ribs a little bit. Sight unseen, give me 11 guys from Memphis, and we'll beat your brains in if you give me 11 guys.
No, I disagree. Listen, I think you can. Listen, you can look at the top 10 list of like players that came out of Tennessee. And I promise, I'm not looking at this on my laptop. I'm pretty sure like 5 of the top 10 were from Nashville this year, out of the state of Tennessee. I'm pretty sure like 5 of them were.
But that mathematically doesn't.
Does Franklin count?
Franklin is near Nashville.
I feel like Franklin and Murfreesboro in my head are kind of the same difference. But I'm telling you right now, Brentwood Academy up in Nashville. I mean, there's players signed all over the place. They sent somebody to Washington this past year. I mean, there's a lot of players coming out of Nashville. I like what they got going on.
All right, we're going to talk about the Auburn Tigers here, at least in a moment. And for item number 10 on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list, let me hit a couple of the comments before we do. Jerry Lewis says, it's good in Tennessee. Seriously, not joking. Guys, where'd everybody go? So he says that in that case, Jeremy Pruitt's trying a little too hard to sort of sell the idea of in-state recruiting in Tennessee. But if you can't get at least half the guys in your class from your own state, then you're going to have a really hard time.
Well, I think you have to be careful with how you slice that because, listen, if you can go up to Kentucky and get a 5-star, in one of those guys' place, I think that's what you do. I think Clemson's a good example of that. We talked about Clemson last week, and South Carolina and Clemson got the same amount of top 10 players from the state of South Carolina, but Clemson was getting the 5 stars from all over the country. So it is what it is.
Cliff Nelson says guys like Jeremy Pruitt, Kirby Smart, Jimbo Fisher, Ed Orgeron, all putting pressure on the recruiting trail. Bama's not going to be getting all the top kids anymore. I think if you just want to isolate this to Jeremy Pruitt here for a moment, I think that is true, that the way that he's going to recruit, this idea that you're going to monopolize talent, whether it be Georgia tried to do that this year, Alabama that's tried to do that for every year since 2010, it is getting harder to do that.
It's very hard to do. And I think it's important that a lot of these things keep being molded. I think that's why you see Bama's got the trainers table coming in the barbershop. And it's like you almost have to keep it fresh. It's things that like Clemson's starting to do and Ohio State's been doing. Florida State's, obviously been moving up. Georgia has the indoor that's being built. So there is a lot of keeping up with the Joneses in recruiting, and I think a lot of these schools are starting to understand, hey, we got to hire the Jeremy Pruitts of the world, people that can get these guys on campus.
Bradley Edwards says that Murfreesboro is 30 minutes from Nashville, so maybe you are right.
I feel like it's right there.
I don't think that's true.
No, I think it's right there. I'm feeling good about it. I'm feeling good about that.
Charles Scott says it's even closer. He says it's 20 minutes. Will Scott says it's 30 miles between the two cities. Yeah. Listen, I've been to Nashville. If it's 30 miles, you're not getting there in 30 minutes.
Yeah. Listen, but I was right on, though, when I said like Alpharetta and Atlanta. I feel like it's
honestly,
like right down the street.
As much as it pains me to say this, you probably were correct.
Feeling good.
All right, let's do item number 10 here. So Charles Barkley, the Auburn alumnus, TNT NBA analyst, going to be set to host Saturday Night Live once again. They put a tweet out that kind of gave this. I guess kind of find out. I didn't realize this. It's going to be Barkley's 4th time hosting the show. Going to be the host coming up here on March 3rd. You see some of the he's going to be on Migos, the musical act the other day. I know you're a huge Migos fan.
Oh, yeah.
But Barkley going to be back on SNL. Barkley gets a lot of sort of mainstream media attention. Does Auburn benefit from that at all, you think?
I don't think there's any doubt. I can't remember who it was, a couple of weeks ago, was on Auburn's campus and goes and checks out the Charles Barkley statue. And I think it was when they were doing a game there, because obviously Auburn's basketball team is very good. But I feel like they do. And maybe it's just because I went to Alabama, so I see the opposite of it. And I see the headlines in places like Birmingham and Montgomery. But there's a lot of attention paid to Charles Barkley on a national scene from the NBA and from college football fans, and he does a good job of capitalizing. We saw him last year. He does a one-on-one interview with Nick Saban. Yeah. He does these things where he goes around and speaks, and obviously doing SNL. I think that as much as he possibly can, he helps out Auburn.
What I was amazed was back during the college football playoff or the SEC championship game that time back in December, him being the Auburn guy, Ernie Johnson, the host inside the NBA and TNT. He's a Georgia graduate.
Right.
I mean, obviously Shaq's the LSU guy there. It was amazing how much time they were spending talking about their sort of like college affiliation. I mean, the NBA, listen, I'm not as big a fan of the association as I used to be, but there's no denying that's a huge cultural influence in America right now. To have SEC schools talked about on that sort of like, of the moment NBA type broadcast,
right.
I do think that's a pretty big deal. I think the Saturday Night Live stuff is kind of in that same vein.
Yeah, and listen, that NBA TNT halftime show, it's based down the street in Atlanta. I mean, they're kind of in the whole, culture that is college football. So I agree. I think it's cool. I had a chance to meet Charles one time. I didn't want to like Charles Barkley. It's like I'm a Bama guy. Yeah. Nicest guy you'll ever meet. Wanted to sit down and talk for him an hour. I left the conversation being like, man, he's one of the greatest dudes I ever met.
By the way, this just occurred to me. We'll do the champion of life after this. So he won his bet with Jalen Hurts. Did Hurts ever wear the Alabama jersey?
Boy, I hope not.
When is that going to happen?
Boy, I hope not. Charles was probably thinking, man, it'd be a slap in the face.
I mean, I told Hurts before the game it's a bad idea, but a bet's a bet. You got to pay the thing off, right?
I hope he does.
I mean, honestly, did I miss this? I mean, I feel like we watched this stuff pretty closely.
Yeah.
I feel like this is something surely I would have heard about.
Was it supposed to be around like the spring game this year though? I feel like that it'll have like a timeline.
He's not going to do this.
No, I hope not. Wait. Listen, I'm a man of my word a lot, but I had to draw a line at seeing Jalen Hurts in an Auburn jersey.
Maybe Tua's got to wear it now.
Maybe so. I hope nobody does, man. It would hurt my feelings. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, I told
you Auburn fans would love it, man.
I thought the bet was a bad idea. You can't have this guy walking around campus wearing an Auburn jersey. But I mean, a bet's a bet. Surely this didn't happen and I missed it. I don't think that it did.
I would have definitely seen it, and I didn't.
He probably tries to get away from doing that. We talked about this in a previous show. If you're wondering what we're talking about, there was a bet between Barkley and Jalen Hurts. Nonetheless, here on SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day, much like the old Tennessee coach Butch Jones was looking for champions of life. Here on SEC Country Live, we never stop our search for champions of life either. And this is actually kind of appropriate for you. You just spent the weekend in an RV down there at Daytona for the Daytona 500, but I'm not quite sure your RV looked like this RV. For sale on Craigslist. How about A&M fans? How much do you like this one? The maroon and white, the Texas A&M deal here. Look at the branded seats.
Do you even call? I mean, to me, I would call that a party bus. Like that's a party bus. That's hey, we're gonna drive, an hour to the game or whatever you got to do. People do that from like Birmingham to Tuscaloosa or from like New Orleans to Baton Rouge for the games. That's like, let's load everybody up, let's pay a driver, and let's get rowdy the entire way.
Yeah, you're getting it.
I don't think anybody's staying the night.
That is such a good word. That is not a word I use very often, but that's such an appropriate word. If you own that bus, you're getting rowdy.
Getting rowdy.
You are getting rowdy in that bus. I wonder, we don't see the picture here, but this is from SECCountry.com, obviously. They linked to the Craigslist deal. But is there a bed in the back of that thing or what?
I wouldn't think so.
Honestly,
I'm telling you, it's like
honestly, if you get rowdy enough, the whole world's a bed.
I guarantee you, this guy like lives in like Houston or something, and he's like paying a driver to take him and his friends down the back. Whoever owns it or whoever's going to buy it, I guarantee that's the point.
That's an awesome thing.
No, it is.
That's the.
It would be perfect, like Atlanta to Athens. I mean, that's exactly what they're probably dealing with right now. Yeah, just hire. Hey, here's $100. Drive me and my friends down there.
You're not gonna get it for $100.
Yeah, whatever. You know,
a driver's probably more expensive. The driver you get for $100, I'm worried for you. The guy say, "Yeah, I'll do it."
Hey, pass me one of those beers back.
Do you have any licenses to do something like that?
I don't know.
Nonetheless, all right. Thanks for being with us today. For the folks with Mike over on the YouTube side of things.
Yeah, we're having a good time over
here. For the folks with me on the Facebook side of things, we appreciate you being here. If you want the podcast, you want to listen to the audio version, the cool thing about the podcast is it's like an on-demand deal. You can start it, you can stop it, you can come back to it. If you're driving in traffic, you're working out, whatever, that's there for you. But if you watch the show on Facebook, it'd be a big help to us if you share the show with your friends. Let them know we're talking about the SEC every single day. We appreciate you being here with us. We're back again tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of SEC Country Live.